Welcome back to the very final episode of our series, Dynamics Unplugged, Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management, Dynamics A to Z, a mouthful. We are at the final letter. We are at the letter Z, and Z is for zip codes, also known as postal codes in many parts of the world. We're talking about address setup. I go to the org admin module and we look at our addresses and address setup. There's a lot of things that come into play here. And before we get into some of that configuration and why it's important, let's look at what the community has asked about zip codes and dynamics specifically in the past. Well, we have Microsoft Learn. We have Microsoft's official documentation that talks about importing zip and postal codes or creating them manually. It references using the data management framework to import those codes, and that some codes require just an upload file. So Belgium, Netherlands, and Sweden, they require a simple file. For Belgium, they have a web page we can pull those from. Netherlands has a third-party organization that provides that file in a specific format. Sweden provides two types of files, one for postal codes, one for addresses, and it supports text file format for both types. Everything else doesn't exist. A lot of people think that all zip and postal codes just are provided out of the box inside of Dynamics. You can get some files out there. I've heard of files on LCS. Typically, you're getting these from specific in countries, right? Maybe you're going to USPS for US postal codes, an official list. Maybe you're going to a government website. Maybe you're going to your TMS provider to maintain that. But you have to get that data. You have to put it in Dynamics 365 if you're going to use it in addresses to maintain contacts and customers and vendor addresses and use that data throughout the system. We look further into other posts here on AXUG, the dynamic community's old site. We see users asking for help importing or getting those files for importing into older versions of AX, specifically around US, Canada, and Mexico. People point out finding some zipped files in lifecycle services that you can get for some of those basic files. A very similar post here also on AXUG. People referencing the data entities they use through the data management framework, postal codes v3 data entity. Others talking about where they went to get specific geographic files. On the forums, there's questions around zip code validation and if the system requires the zip code and when and how to prevent those errors. And then there's even other users, additional users asking how to bring in and import those postal codes where people have provided feedback around APIs that feed that data from various sites and do postal code mapping, or just using, once again, the postal codes v3 data entity. So these on Microsoft's community.dynamics.com. All very similar feedback. How do we get that data? We bring it into Dynamics 365, the consensus about how to import it through the postal code v3 data entity. If I were to go to zip postal codes here under address setup, you can see the country and regions that they get mapped against. USA, 5-digit zip postal code. If I look at another country, like Canada, for example, you can see those don't exist here. I would have had to bring them into this environment. Here's China's postal codes, also numeric, only 6 digits, and obviously Great Britain, Canada, additional countries that have separators in alpha and numeric characters. If I look at the country that zip codes are mapped against, there is a parameter to use the zip code plus 4 postal code validation rules. For those of us in the US, we often have the dash after our first 5 digits, and then the 4 additional characters in our postal code. That validation can be enforced if required. Otherwise, it is disabled. The address format that's associated with your country or region controls where the zip code displays when we're showing addresses, as well as the validation piece that many users asked about. Looking here at the address format, you can see there's an address component, which fields display and are used in an address. For example, this address format 10001 has street, city, state or province, zip, postal code, and country region. There's no separator, so there's no commas, there's no hashes or dashes. It does separate out new lines, which is the street address first, then goes to a new line, shows city, state, and zip all in one line, goes to a third line, and then shows country region. None of those are mapped as data entry only. You can put in fields that are there for data reference, but they don't appear in any documentation. We don't print those. You can have expand. This is used for things like state and country region. Instead of saying H and USA, it would say New Hampshire and United States of America and print that on documentation. And then you also have the ability to mark an address application as special. In terms of that validation, you will get errors if you have a zip postal code as part of an address and there is no value provided in the address itself, or the value the user tries to manually key in does not exist because it is a table. We do have to maintain the zip and postal codes in this address setup form. So if you have zip postal code, it will validate that you are using zip and postal codes. If you have things mapped to those zip and postal codes, for example, here for this China address, this city is mapped to postal code 100006. If I try to use that postal code and link it to a city it's not mapped to, that will throw a validation error as well. So the address set up around your zip postal codes and really all of the address components is supremely important. Getting in those zip and postal codes requires data migration. There is a validation on creating address. Do you require these fields that can be enabled under the parameters as well? Make sure you have a firm understanding of these, particularly if you're working internationally where the address formats and rules are all very different. If you're using EDI, you're using TMS providers, they might have mappings that are looking at fields that they require, and depending on the address format, that might not have the intended desire that you wanted. So ensure providing those mappings with your partners that you take into account the different formats you might have and the different validation rules you have around your zip postal codes. And that is it, our final episode, the letter Z, Dynamics A to Z in Finance and Supply Chain Management. Appreciate you all checking in, and we will see you soon.